So hooks are nothing but the utility functions that we use in our function-based components. Usually in our class-based components, we will maintain things with state of the component. Let's say I go here, this news component has its own state, this state value. So these things need not be implemented with this approach. So this is one way to do it. This is old approach. The latest trend is to use function-based components where we will use hooks instead of this kind of constructor logic to use the state variables and side effects. So let's go back and create a new application. And so, but before we go, so we have seen one way is to create with app with npm with latest. This is one approach to create a React application. And another approach is to create with React app. So we can give a name to the application with my React hooks. And this will initialize the application with bare minimum setup, all the utility scripts and everything. The first thing we will look at is use state. So use state is used for maintaining state values, and those values will be used in different components for interaction. Let's finish this up. Then we'll just visit our app component and we'll use entirely function-based components this time. So now we have the setup. We've created my React hooks application. If I want to start this application, I need to go into this application directory and React hooks. If I go over it, and if you see, we have scripts set up, and then dependencies like React DOM, React, all these are installed. Now, if I want to start this application, I can do npm start. It's like specified here. Npm start will do this. It will open OpenHost 3000. Okay, now this is all good. You can close this one and it will still be running in the background. So let's put it side by side. This time we're going to make sure 20% space weapons. Okay, now we have, if we just try to visit what all things have been set up, we have index.js. This is the main area where React application starts. Strict mode is something that helps us get warnings in the browser console whenever we do something wrong, recommended. It may not be complete errors, but warnings if there are any things that we are missing that might potentially break the application. Those warnings will be shown in the console, browser console, if you have this strict mode enabled for this. This is entirely optional. You can remove this strict mode thing or keep it. So for now, in development mode, I'm going to keep this. And once we are in production, we can actually solve it. There is no harm keeping this. So now let's go to, so this is more specific to React. Even though our JavaScript syntax is correct, it will still show if it is logically not correct or if it's not recommended by React standards, then it will show that. We'll discuss that when we are using the application. So these are like old things. These are not required for us initially. So let's remove these things. The titles and all these are not required. So basic application doesn't need that. So this is the main entry point. So app.js is the main source of all this components, everything. So what we are going to do now is we will just remove this and just keep the bare minimal setup. Yes. So here I'm going to remove the entire thing. Here to here. And we can just say h1 here. This gives us the bare minimum setup. Okay. So this time we are going to demonstrate all the hooks we are going to use hooks in our components. So let's go to index.js. So this app we are actually importing from here. Let's not do that right now. Let's comment out this part and let's define this app component ourselves within this file. We can actually have it in separate files. For simplicity's sake, we have it here. How to define a function component is like defining a function called the name of the component that we want to declare. And it should return some JSX statements. So this now is going to return something like this, a fragment. So we also have seen fragments. If we don't have divisions, let's say if any React element, React component can return only one parent element. So if I have multiple elements like let's say h1, something like heading and h2, these both components I cannot return at the same time. So I have to wrap that up in one parent component. I can wrap it in a division, which will essentially add one more division to the top, big element to the top. Again, so if I have to return this two elements, I have to wrap that up in one parent element. So that will unnecessarily add a division element in the elements. Division element. So earlier there was no before fragments were introduced into React, there was no other approach except having a division element. So now that we don't need to do that, we can wrap this up in this fragments. These are called fragments. So if we do this, it won't add an additional division. It will just wrap these two elements into one fragment. And from here, see, these two are not wrapped into one division. It's wrapped in a fragment. So this time we are going to use, first thing we are going to look at in React hooks. React hooks are just utility functions for doing various operations, various interactions with the framework. So what we are going to do now is we are going to use state. Use state is actually used for changing state of a variable. Let's say I have something like a package that I want to deliver to the package, status of a package, postal package or something, packages, something, done or delivered. And let's say this status I want to make sure that it is dynamic. So I can define a status where state variable, these are called state variables. But before doing this, let's just try to visit something like object deconstruction and array deconstruction. So let's say, for example, I have an array. So let's say, so people array. Constant. Let's define a constant called people. This time I'm going to use something like Alice. I don't know. So if I want to print the first item in this, I can use people of 0. I go to the console, you can see Alice. If I want to print the second element, I can do it with people of 1. So if I want to use variable names instead of these indexes, we can actually extract these with array deconstruction. Let's remove this people thing and let's put first and then use this first value here. Let's remove this one. So what this has done is it'll take the first element in the array and deconstruct it into this. So this array equals this array, but we're only using one value. That means we only need the first value. Let's say I want 2 values, I can do it with second. This value can be anything, first value or second value. This variable name can be anything. So this time, instead of using index, I'm going to use the variable name. So I'll raise. So these are. What if I don't want the first 2 values and I just want the third value? I can do something like this. Comma and then comma and third value. I can just use this third value anywhere. And so this is how the array deconstruction works. Similarly, object deconstruction also happens in a simple way. So my object, say this is and then console log of my object. So entire object is printed. If I want to access the C element, I can do it with C.C. C's value is D, or I'll just do one if I want to. Do this. The object value C is cat. So I can actually do one more thing instead of doing this way. Just do A. So key value pairs is what objects will have. You can always refer to the key. Let's say I don't want to use my object.c. Instead, I want to use C directly. I can deconstruct it with like this. C, I can just directly use it. And this will print the cat. So if I just want it now, so in arrays we have followed the index and number index properly, right? We don't need to follow that. Yes. So if I want to deconstruct A after C, I can do that. So objects will identify its keys with the keys, the values with the keys. So C and A are A and C. The order does not matter as long as this key matches the property. It will destructure and use it. So this A will map to A, C will map to C. I can do B also, yes. this B item. So the order does not matter when it comes to objects, and in the arrays, the order does matter. So this is destructuring. Okay. Now we know the basic destructuring model. Now let's do something like constant something and use state. Let's import this use state from here. So this is a named export. So we have to use the bracket syntax. Use state from here. Let's see what this contains. This returns an array. The first value is undefined, which is a value, and second value is the function. So basically, what this is doing is returning a state value and a function that will allow us to manipulate state value. Let's say I will do arrays destructuring here, and let's use status as the first status value, and some function name we can use set status. So this is just a convention. We can use any function name or any name to these values. And use state will accept the initial value of the state variable. So now if I print status, this will have false, which means the initial value is false. So in this place, so this dynamic state value I can use in anywhere in the component. So this not delivered, I'm going to use this not delivered as the value. Status is, let's just use some JavaScript syntax here. This will wrap it into a string. We'll just remove it for now. So based on the status value, I want to make sure that it is not delivered or delivered. If status is true, and I want to show this as delivered. If not, I want to show this as not delivered. This is dynamically done based on the status state variable. So now let's add one more button to add interaction for the state variable. Button delivered. Currently, it is not delivered. I click on this button, it should change the state to delivered. Let's do that. There is no interaction right now. This button doesn't do anything right now. Let's add an on-click event handler for this. I add this, and this accepts a function. This is how we define a function. And the return value. So inline functions, as we have seen in our JavaScript program, we have two ways to define it. We can define it like this, and we can define it like this. So this way, the first parenthesis will represent the input arguments, and the second thing after the arrow is the return value. If I have one line that executes and returns immediately, I can use it within the same parenthesis. If I have multiple lines, something like a plus a plus b plus 1, something like this, I need to have this traces implemented, and there should be a return value. But this is a shorthand for single line execution, just return 1. So what this means is it will accept a as a parameter. Let's say plus 1 is the return value. This means a function, this is defining a function that accepts one parameter called a and returns the value a plus 1. And this also, same thing, just that we are doing it in multiple lines. So if there are multiple lines of code, we have to use parentheses like this. And if there is one line that is returning, we can use it like this. Let's remove this. And here I just want to use one line. So I don't need to do parentheses again. I can just use one single line. And this is going to use set status with true. This will set the status to delivered is true. And as soon as this set status is set to true, and this line also changes. If I now click on deliver, the status value got changed to true. The initial value was false, now it's setting to true. And this component is re-rendered, and the status is showing as delivered. So this is dynamically changing the state. So whichever element depends on component depends on a specific state value. Whenever somebody changes the state value, that component automatically gets re-rendered. So that's the dynamic behavior of here. So similarly, we will just implement a simple checkbox component. Instead of this set status and status, we'll use something like checked or not checked. Use checked as false, and this time instead of this, we use input. The type of it is checkbox. So we have a checkbox. So and I'll add one more text here so that it's clear what's happening. So if checked, it will show checked. Otherwise, not checked. If you want to embed JavaScript within the JSX, we have to use process like this. This is currently not checked. So even if I click on this, the checked status is not getting changed because we didn't add any event handler to this input element. So also whenever this status value is true or false, that has to be reflected in this input element. So the value has to be whether it is checked or not. Value true means it's not checked. Value true means it is checked, and value false means it's not checked. So whenever I change the status of this, we will attach an onChange event to this input element that will allow us to change the status, checked status to true or false, whatever is the opposite of current values. Let's do that. So this time it's going to accept subject equals not. So what this does is, let's revisit, explain. Type value, current value is the value that is assigned to the checked state variable. And whenever something happens, onChange event happens, whenever some click happens, this has to change the status to the opposite of the current status. If it is checked, it should make it unchecked. If it is unchecked, it should make it to checked. So that is what it is doing. So if it was false, whenever I click on this, it will make it true. If it is true, if I click on that again, it's going to make it to false. Let's check this. Click, check. If I click it again, it's unchecked. And there is one more improvement we can do. We can actually accept checked parameter within this function. So instead of directly manipulating this check value, I can actually get the current value and then check, make the opposite of this. This is similar to what we did earlier. Just one more additional layer of set. So this is good. Now let's check. So, so this check value is not getting updated. Okay, I think this is not good. So let's use this one. This is good. So we now are able to manipulate this check status. So now we will do, so this is one simple component, right? There can be multiple scenarios where you have to pass in these status variables, status methods into descending components, the children of these components. Let's look at how to pass these into the children. So for that, let's implement a star rating system here. So in our app, let's remove this and let's create some component called star rating. So return a component that says star rating. Let's remove this also for now. So this component is not yet implemented. Let's implement function star rating. This returns another array of stars. So I want 10 stars here. So something like a rating system. So each of those is going to be a star. So for that, I'm going to use some library called React Icons. Let's import that. React Icons I haven't installed yet. Let's install that. Npm install React Icons. Have it. This. So now let's import the component called FA star from React Icons. You can actually refer to React Icons documentation to know what all icons are available. So FA stands for font awesome. FA star, we have to use it here. So, but this star rating, I want this to have like 10 number of stars. Let's create one star for now. Create a component called star and return this FA star component. So I'll just use this star component here, but I'm going to change this to have more than one star. So now we can see that one star. Now I want this stars to be like based on the number of items passed. Let's say I want to pass in that's total stars. Total stars equals, let's say, 10. I will get based on this number of stars that is passed into this component. I want this to have that many stars. So I'm going to accept this parameter as a props property. I can do it with this way, or I can actually deconstruct this with this. All the properties that we pass to the elements, components, will be accepted in the props property. But if I deconstruct, I can actually use the same names. So based on this number of stars, I want to have that many stars. So for that, I'm going to create a utility function that create array. Function create array. This function is going to return something like it's going to accept the number of. I'll just make this as a constant function. This is a function which is assigned to variable. So this function is going to return an array of the length. So this is going to create an array of specified length, whatever length we passed to create array. It's going to return an array that is of that much length. So what we are going to do here, instead of returning star, I'm going to create an array with the number that is passed into the total stars. It's going to create an array now. So this just empty array, empty slots, which is of length, total number of stars, whatever, 10, let's say. So for each of the elements, I'm going to do a map function that will accept some length. N is the value and I is the index. So for each of the array, I'm going to return a star. So this is giving 10 stars. So what I'm doing here is, instead of repeating star 10 times like this, I'm just creating a placeholder array with that much length and doing a map function on the array to actually return that many stars. So this, if we see here instead, this is giving that many stars. All these SVG elements are getting placed. So one thing we need to do here is add the key. If I go to the console, we can see that this is a warning showing that unique key property should exist for any of the list items. So here I need to pass in the key, a unique key for this element. Each of the star elements, I need to pass in a unique key. So for now, I'm going to use this index I value. I starts from 0. So n starts from the value of this array. Actually, is going to create an array with all zeros. So this I index, I'm going to use it as the key value. So now that warning is gone, now we have 10 stars. So next thing I will do is, if I don't pass in any value, I need a default value passed into default values specified. For that, I'm going to use 5 as the default for total number of stars. For example, if I don't pass in this property or attribute, it will default to 5 stars. Yes. Now we have 10 stars. So next thing I want to do is, we will use state values to actually select these stars. How do I do a rating system? Is like selecting how good the product is. This is an array object. I just do this to here. So array of 10. This is actually an array of 10. If I just expand the array of 10, this is actually extracting the array into another array. Basically, we are constructing, expanding. We don't need to, but that's it. So here, if you see, This is again another array that is expanding all these values into one more array. This is destructuring. So if I do readouts, that's destructuring into an array. So it's like expanding all the elements into this array again. If I have an object, I again as 1, 2, 3, 4, console log on dot array will print another array that is with the same. It's just deconstruction, but we don't need to do that deconstruction. This array itself will is that for us. It's not 15 change. So we have to use array destructs to structure. So that's the reason. Then is going to give an object of the array. I want to create an array object, but in order to expand those array object elements, I need to do this. Yeah, this is giving an array, this is giving an object. So array, it will create an array object. If I do this, it's expanding the array object into elements into this array. Okay, array is a constructor for array object, and we are actually copying all those elements into another array using this expansion syntax. Dots. If I have an object, my object has I do expand my object, it copies that object into another object. This is actually copying this array object into this new array. Okay. Let's go back to the number of stars. Now this time we are going to handle the event. So if I click on one star, it has to highlight stars and give the rating. So what's the rating, current rating and all that. So for that, I'm going to use the current state of the value as we'll select a color to this. So there is a property for a star called color, which will accept some string. Okay. So all are green. So but this green, I want to make sure that if something is selected, that is red, and if it's not selected, it's gray. So for that, I'm going to maintain a state value here. Let's go make that value. So we'll have accept parameter called selected. The default value is false. And if it is selected, I'm going to use red. If it's not selected, I'm going to use gray. So this is the syntax for if else. It's a conditional operator, question mark is. So if it is selected, it's going to be red, and if it's not selected, it's going to be green. And I need to make sure that if I click on something, it gets selected. So for that, I need to add a event handler on click, and this function is going to do something, or let's say on select. So this function is not defined yet. So I'm going to pass this function from up above, from the star rating or from the, this component. So this on select is going to be passed in as a parameter again from this component. So for this selected and onSelect, I'm going to use a state variable here. Use a constant selected stars, comma set selected stars. This time it's used it as 0. So there was 0 stars selected. If I click on this, there should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stars should be selected. So that is the count that I want to pass in to this guy. So this, based on the index of this star, this value gets changed, selected or not selected. If I click on this, so all the stars that are before this should all get selected. That way we will construct the logic. So in the create array, now we have star. Let's expand this into a new array, new line. So this star, we have to pass selected as true if the count is greater than the current selected value. Selected stars is 0. So based on the number of selected stars, this I is greater than this, but selected stars is greater than this I, then we should select the previous ones. Let's implement the logic and show you. Selected should be true if selected stars is greater than I. This means if the star that is currently being rendered, this is the 0th star, this is the first star, second star, third star. If selected stars is 5, all the stars that are having index 0 through 4 or 5 should get selected. That means selected is true if the selected stars is greater than the current index of the star. And this doesn't work yet. Let's add an event handler that will do that. On select, we are going to pass in an event handler. On select function, whenever somebody clicks on a star, this function gets called. This function is going to do something like this. Set selected stars of I plus 1. So this actually is going to select the number of stars. If it's 1 or 2, based on as I starts with 0, we want to make sure that the index is incremented by 1. And now select this 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the value is set to 6. The value is set to 6 because I is 0 for the first one. Yeah. I select this, select this. That's how this event handler is getting passed down. This set selected stars is the function that is passed down as a parameter to this as an onSelect parameter. This is how we pass in state variables as well as the set state variables functions down the hierarchy. Okay, that's about use state. So we have looked into same component, interacting with it within the same component, as well as passing down the same state variable down the children. So now we will look into use effect. Use effect is used for handling side effects. So when some interaction happens or when the page loads or when whatever background operations has to happen will be handled through use effect. So for that, we will just use use effect. Let me just import this. This time, I'm going to change this entire app component. Let's remove all this. Run this. Let's use simple statements instead of we have section, something like a competition winner, congratulations. Something like a name. This name is not defined. For that, we are going to use space value, state variable, const name, set name, use state, and initially let's initialize it to Jan. So it says congratulations, Jan. Now let's change the value with the button, change the winner. That will have on click event handler. That will do a set name. String is going to another function that is a set name. This time we will use the. Let's click on this and it changes. All good. And let's see here. And this is the default title for this web page React app. So let's use a user effect to change the title based on this state value, name value. Let's create a user effect. User effect accepts first parameter as a function. There are other parameters. Right now, let's stick to the first parameter. User effect is a background thing that runs whenever the document loads or whenever this component renders. So let's use some simple JavaScript here. Document title. We are changing this title, React app title. Here we are going to use celebrate name. Celebrate chat. I click on change the winner. The title got changed to celebrate with. So this happens whenever we change any state value, status variable within this component. So there are other advanced things. So this use effect should not run every time. Let's say if I want to control when this use effect has to run, when this side effect has to run, I can specify it with the parameters as the second parameter. Yeah, dependency array as a second parameter. So for now, let's change this thing, document title, to do a console log instead. Let's use another user effect. And this time, this also will do a console log, but I'm going to introduce one more state value, state variable here. Const admin, let admin this state as false, whether you're an admin or not. Let's create a button that will create set the admin file. Set admin Just then want to change it to login. It's just dummy, doesn't do anything. It just changes the state value, admin state value to true. Initially it is false. Let's do console log in the another view of it. We'll say the user yes. If it is admin is true, we'll print admin. If not, very not admin. It is here in the console. So initial state is celebrate jam from the first user file, and the user is not admin from the second user file. So now if I here and change the value again, this user effect has run and this user effect has run here. And if I click on this user effect has run and this user effect has run. So no matter what the state value that got changed, just all the user effects are getting re-rendered. So we can control that mechanism. Let's say I want to use this user effect, run this user effect only when the first time the page renders. I can use an empty array here. That this actually means there are no dependent state variables that this user effect depends on. So that actually means if I reload, this runs first time, and if I click on winner, this doesn't run. If I click on login, this doesn't run because we are explicitly specifying that this user effect does not depend on any state values. Empty array means that. And now let's change this empty array to name. Whenever name changes, then only you want to render this. And this runs when first time the component renders as well as when. By specifying this dependency array here, we are telling React that this user set has to run first time when the mount happens in the component renders as well as whenever this state variable changes. It doesn't render when other state variables change. This user effect depends only on name state variable. So whenever that changes, I want to run this, is what we are specifying here. Whereas use effect, the second use effect, let's specify admin here. So what we are specifying here is admin, whenever admin value changes, this user effect has to run. So this doesn't restrict us from rendering this during the first time the component gets loaded. So all user effects will run when the first time the component renders. Here, let's refresh. First time, all the user effects will run. Now let's change the winner. This changes the name. And this runs only this user effect. And if I click on login, this runs only this user effect. So this is the side effects and how we control when those side effects will run. So one use case of using this use effect is fetching data. So earlier in our previous implementation, we had done fetch data from a remote server with the class-based components. Now class-based components are not being used extensively, and it's going to go away very soon. So the trend is to use use effect to fetch the data from remote servers. Let's do that now. Let's remove this entirely. And let's create a state value. So before doing that, let's go visit some API. We have some APIs, news APIs we have seen last time, but this time I'm going to use GitHub APIs. So there is something called api.github.com/users. This will give us all the open source users of GitHub. So this is a JSON data. This data we are going to fetch from this user effect. Let's remove this. First thing we'll do is return some paragraph. Says no users. We don't have any data, so we don't have any data. No users. So now let's check the state variable for storing the data that we fetch from the remote server. Data and set data. Use state. Initially, it will be an empty array. And then we'll use effect to fetch data. Whenever the component first loads, we want to fetch the data. The first argument is a function. And second argument, I'm going to pass in two parameters. Which means this use effect has to run only the first time. In 1 minute. So use effect we are going to use to fetch the data, and this use effect will have to run only the first time the component renders. The app component renders. So here we are going to use a JavaScript function called fetch. So this fetch will accept the URL. Let's use this URL api.github.com/users. Once the data is fetched, I'm going to use a then function. This is a callback function. This is defaultly supported by JavaScript. This is all JavaScript. Nothing specific about JS here. Fetch function. Once the data is fetched, it will do this callback function. So the callback function I'm going to pass in as this. This will return. So this I'm going to indent it. And see clearly, we can have multiple then statements and then callback functions here. So this then first then callback will actually accept response. So this parameter can be any name, but actual data that comes from this APM will be passed on to this callback. So we actually need to parse that data. This is a JSON data. So for that, we need to do response.json to actually parse the JSON response and form a JavaScript object from it. And then after the JSON is passed, I'll add one more then callback, which will do set the receive data from here. And I'm going to use set data. So this name is confusing. Let's use something like P here. Start data. So this response JSON, after JSON parsing, it will be passed on to D, and that data will be set to set data. I now print, let's say, if data exists. Let's do one small thing, some hash here, and just print the JSON itself. It's return. JSON dot string define of data. So we will create a paragraph element and where this, sorry, up into a return statement. Return paragraph that has JSON string define of data. Just to demonstrate, we have the data printed. Now we are getting data from the response. We can just use the login. So the login will have the username of that person. Just giving it not to confuse with this data. Just giving a name. Here's a variable name. Response data. I'll give response data. You can use any variable names, but make sure that you don't confuse with this data and this data variables. There's a callback function that gives the response. Whatever is returned by this will be given as response. Okay? And we are passing that into JSON. Whatever this is returning, that is passed on to the next callback in this value. This value will contain the result of this statement. So this data is coming. Now we will use a division instead of string defined data. We just use some division that says an unordered list of the data.map. For each of the users, we are going to use login and ID. User, for each user, we are going to return list item, which has user.login. Right here, since we have put our usernames, but we have specified key here whenever we are using list items, we have to use key. We want to use user.id as the key, as the name. So that's good. Now, so this is actually redundant data. Actually, you can actually use set data directly without having to use this. Set data itself as a callback. Let's comment out this part, and as a callback to this, I'm going to just use set data. Whatever is passed as response data, this function, it automatically calls this function with the data that is returned by this. What we are actually doing is we are receiving and again calling this. Instead, let the then function itself call this directly. So this is one optimization that we can do. If I refresh, same thing. So this is extra. We don't need it. We can just directly pass this set data callback function as a callback function. Now let's add an event handler, one button that clears the entire data. Let's add one button here. Clear data. Doesn't do anything right now. We'll add a on-click event, which will be set data to empty array. Observe this. This is actually passing in only at the beginning. And once I clear this won't re-render. I clear. All data is gone. If I don't have this empty array, then I am zeroing. Whenever the component re-renders, it will again That's the data. So if I go see the network tab, it keeps on fetching the data whenever the component tree enters. This is actually going to ladder version API server. So we should always have this empty area. If I do that, and it will fetch only once and never does it again. And also whenever some property changes, a filter or something if we add, only then we have to refresh the data. If we try to eliminate this dependency array, that will hog our backend requests. So as you have seen, there is an infinite number of requests going continuously. As the component tree renders, it will hog the server. Clear data or and what we have seen use state and use effect. Now there is one more addition on what we need to look at is use reducer. So use reducer is an enhancement or a more granular control on top of use state. So this time we are going to use reducer instead of use state. Let's replace it with use reducer and remove this entire thing here. And this time I'm going to use a constant all numbers and set number. But this is a placeholder for use reducer. Use reducer accepts two things. First thing is a function, callback function, and then an initial value for this variable. So this is going to return new state value. So use reducer, the first callback, let's say I accept number as the first argument, but whatever the previous state of the state variable will be received as the first argument to the callback function, and second argument will be whatever we pass in as a argument to this set number function. So this function is going to be added to this variable set number. Whenever I call set number, this function is going to get called. So that whatever arguments we pass into this, that will come from the second argument here of the function. So always first argument is going to be the state variable, and second argument is going to be what we passed in set number. And let's say new number here, and this callback function is going to return number yes. Let's demonstrate this with a statement h1. Let's use number here, number 0. So we are going to have an on-click event on this h1 element, which will call the user set numbers. So I'm going to pass in 1 as an argument to new number. So whatever we pass in here will be passed in as the second argument and then further. So always the first argument is going to be the state value, current status of the status variable, state variable. So now this is going to return 0 plus 1 initially. The next time I click on it, the previous state of the number is 1, which is 1. And again, 1 is going to get passed, and it's going to do 1 plus 1, 2. I click 1 more. Previously it was 2, like that. So, just like use state, use reducer is used for state, maintaining state variables. Let's define a constant called number and set number. Instead of useState, if I use useState, I can just initialize it with a number. And let's do that here. Return number on click is going to do set number of 1. Or I can just say number plus 1. Let's import useState. Okay, this does the same thing, right? So it will increment every time I click on this, it will take the current number and increment this with 1. So if I have complex logic, let's say this simple calculation that we can do in every other component, wherever we are calling set number, we can call this calculation, do this calculation every time and do the update the value. But if we have complex dependencies, let's say fetching some data from database and doing some manipulation, all that, every time we do that, every component that does this set number thing should handle all that complex logic. So what the advantage of user reducer is that we will reduce the complexity of the calling element. The element who is calling this reducer function will reduce the complexity of the operations that it has to do. So all these calculations can happen within our use reducer callback. Stop use state and use reducer that has a granular control over this. This function is nothing but in our use state, whatever the set number was doing, that is being done by this function now. The only difference is the control is entirely given to us. What has to happen when somebody calls set number is all in our hands now. With use reducer, we have the full control. With use state, we always have simple logic, either set or get. Set number, if I call it with a new value, it will always set that value to number. If I have to have some validation, let's say if I pass in -1 as the number here, if I want to validate if the number is supposed to be negative or not, I can do that granular checks within the use reducer function. What I'm going to do here is the first argument to the use reducer's callback function is the current state of the value, current status value, current value of the status variable number. The same thing will be passed. And the second argument, from second argument onwards, whatever is passed to this second one, set number, whatever values 1, 2, 3, and so on, all those things will come into these arguments. What has to happen upon calling this set number can be decided over here. If I just don't want to do anything here, whatever you pass in the value, let's say I will pass in 45 here. Whether you pass in anything, 45 or not, I'm going to always set the number to, let's say, okay, number return. Okay. What this function does is, it will take the arguments passed and then return the new state for this status variable. Now, if I click on this, it will always set to 10, no matter what I set it. In the event handler, it is being set it to 45. That is getting passed in as the first argument here. Number, let's say, I'll add new number. So this 45, if I do, let's say, console log new number. If I click on this, the new number is now 45 that is passed because we are passing 45 here. But the value of number is always set to 10 because we are returning 10 from this callback function. Okay. What this first function does is accepts the existing state of the value and returns the new state of the value, status variable. Accept the current status and returns a new status. That is what this does. This reduces it as full granular control on what has to happen upon setting a new value. And in the use state, whatever is passed in as a new value will be set automatically, whether it is negative, positive, valid, or invalid, doesn't matter. And we have control of validating and adding more complex logic, calculations, database manipulations, and everything within the user reducer. So that is giving more control to us than the end user of the function. Understood. But basically, use reducer will give us full control on what will happen on calling the second function. So use state, let's use state. What has to happen on this is all handled by this. But if I use reducer, I can specify what has to happen to this. And this always returns 1, no matter what the value is set. It will always set it to 1 because we have made it so. Now let's do some simple refactoring. I think this may get clear when we demonstrate this. So let's say I will have checkbox here. Return try to say input here. Type as checkbox value as checked. So the state value has to be defined here. Set and set. This might give you a better idea. You state of box. Actually, it is not checked. And we have checked or not checked. So I will add an event handler on click. This will do mention, I think. Click check as not checked. This is what we had earlier. Now we will refactor this to use reducer instead of use state. So what we'll do is instead of use state, we're going to use reducer. And the first argument is a callback function that accepts the current status, which is checked status, and set checked status to not checked status. And then second argument is the default value, first initial value, there's the checked variable. Now, we no longer need to pass in this set check. So just rename this to toggle, and you can just remove this and change it to toggle. So the entire logic of changing the current value to not checked is delegated to the reducer, not to the input element. Any element that wants to manipulate this can just do a toggle, call this toggle function. Works. The entire logic is defined in one place, and we don't have to do this logic every time we have another input element. So instead of doing this, I can just specify toggle function direct reference to the toggle function. That does everything for us. Let's do check one more time. Works. You don't need to do any complex calculations within this input element to set this check value. So all the complexity is handled by this callback function. That reduces, like, when we have more complex logic, this will come in handy. Let's do one improvement on top of this. Let's say I have some message here. Let's put a message here, paragraph, and I'll use a status variable here, state, and we will use reducer and some kind of callback function, and then initial state. So this initial state is going to be an object. Let's define this initial state that says message as hi. Let's leave it like this. We handle it later. So message is going to be initial. Let's say I'll just put it down here. This state, I'm going to use it in this message. State down message. Initial state is set to message. So message is hi. Now I want to have some interaction. I'll create a button. Let's say on click. I want to call a function. Let's just say this is delegating different type of functions. There is one action called array, and one action called whisper. So upon clicking on yell, it has to do something, and upon clicking on whisper, it has to do something else. This kind of delegations can be done easily with a dispatch function using use reducer. So basically, we can delegate multiple actions with one function. So I'll name this dummy as dispatch function. This is useful when we are handling Redux and other state libraries. So dispatch is very useful for doing the delegation of actions to different methods. So I'm going to name this second function, second argument as dispatch. This is a function. We are going to call this dispatch function whenever something happens. So I'm going to use dispatch, call this dispatch, on click. I'm going to use dispatch again. So this dispatch and this dispatch has no difference right now. What I'm going to do is, whenever L is button is clicked, for this dispatch, I'm going to pass in an object with type as L. The only difference is the arguments that we are passing to this dispatch function. So this time, for this dispatch, type I'm going to pass in as visitor. Okay, now we have one handler function, event handler. Let's say all event handlers, you can actually put it in under dispatch. Based on the type of the event that happens, we can take different actions. The only difference is we're all passing same dispatch, but passing in different arguments. The type argument is going to change based on the button that we clicked on. Let's define this dispatch. So what we are going to do here, instead of this callback, we are going to have a reference to a function called reducer. So this reducer is a function. I'm going to define it. Function reducer. Instead of defining something like this, I'm just replacing this entire thing with callback function called reducer. Okay. Nothing but defining something. I'm just going to return some value here, an empty object. Or I'll just say message. Yes. Yeah. No matter what we pass in, let's say here, square error. Always it returns error. Are we clear so far what we have done? It's going to get more complex if you don't understand that what we did here, instead of using an inline callback, I extracted it into a reducer function and returning a new state object whenever no matter what we pass in as arguments, let's remove this. No matter which button I call, I'm going to use hello as this message. Refresh, initially it was hi, yellow or whisper, it's always going to be hello. This time, based on this type, I'm going to change this state that is returned. So I'm going to use if. So we actually need to receive that type argument, right, in the reducer. The first argument that this receives is the state argument, the state of this. And then what it receives is the action. Let's say this object is the action that we pass in. If action dot time is equal to L, I'm going to return some message, new state as hey, else if action dot type equals whisper, return message as excuse me. So based on the arguments passed to the type, the message that returned, the state value will change. Now click on L, it will say hey. Click on whisper, it will say excuse me. There is one better option here. Instead of this if else conditions, I can actually use a switch statement. This is a standard way to handle state changes. Switch action part time. If it is L, return message as hey. If it is whisper, return message as excuse me. After this is on an object. Now we have the same logic in a switch statement. Okay, this is how we use dispatch, the standard method. This kind of syntax we are going to use in ReactJS and other libraries, state libraries. So that's why I've shown you this. And we have the previous state value. We can actually use that previous state within our new state. So in the message, I'm going to say convert this into a string like this. Hey, I just say in the previous state's message, I can use that previous state also. So now if I click on Gal, it says, hey, I just said hi. Similarly, I can use the same kind of yes, and use the previous state also. Just state of message. So based on the previous state information, we can reduce the new state information with the reducer function based on the specified action. Let's say I have a database resource. Let's say I want to create, read, update, delete operations. So based on the action type that you dispatch, okay, create, update, delete, something like that. Based on those actions, we can call the respective API functions, API methods to do that specific operation in the backend. So this is how all complex operations can be combined into one single handler called reducer. With the dispatch function, we can actually dispatch the events or actions. So we're actually dispatching actions. This is L action, whisper action. It can be a create action, update action, delete action, something like that. All complex API logic can be put under one single reducer. That will be it. That's about reducers.